Imagine this. A really quiet agricultural region, often called a nation's breadbasket, suddenly just thrust into the national spotlight. And we're not just talking about like a new highway or maybe a factory. This is about a complete reimagining. Picture this corner of the world, historically kind of overlooked, known mostly for its farming, its fishing villages, suddenly earmarked for a brand new city, a planned city. Plus, you've got global fast food chains opening up with huge fanfare and these giant wind turbines already spinning on the hills. What exactly is going on here? And I guess, why now? So in this deep dive, we're going to explore the many layers of this really fascinating transformation that's unfolding right now in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. For generations, this parish, well, it's been the island's main agricultural hub, right? Farming, fishing. But now, it's the focus of unprecedented, really ambitious development. We'll be zeroing in on three main pillars driving this shift. First, there's the highly ambitious proposed third city for Jamaica. Then, the symbolic arrival of a global fast food giant, KFC, in Black River. And finally, those pioneering wind energy projects that have frankly already changed the landscape in Jamaica's energy picture. Okay, let's unpack this. What's really behind this sudden surge of government interest, private interest in St. Elizabeth? Who stands to benefit? And, maybe more critically, what are the big questions being raised about, well, potential ulterior motives, even talk of backhanders or bribes behind this whole development push? We've got a fantastic source document that lays it all out for us, drawing from official government announcements, local news reports, detailed project info.
Yeah, what's truly intriguing here is how these things that seem pretty separate, fast food, massive infrastructure projects, renewable energy, how they actually connect, they link up to a much larger national vision for Jamaica. But like any big development push, especially one involving serious capital and policy shifts, it naturally invites scrutiny, intense scrutiny, actually. This deep dive, it distills insights from a comprehensive source document. It's titled, "The Jamaican Government's Sudden Focus on St. Elizabeth's Development or Deal-Making." And this document pulls from a whole range of reliable sources, direct statements from the Prime Minister's office, major Jamaican news outlets like The Gleaner, The Observer, Caribbean National Weekly, Our Today News, plus specific info on companies like BMR Energy involved in the wind farms.
So our goal here is really to walk you through these different perspectives, give you a complete balanced picture of what's happening on the ground.
Okay, so let's start with the biggest piece, that grand vision. Jamaica's proposed third city. For a very long time, St. Elizabeth has had this really unique, vital identity in Jamaica. Everyone knows it as the island's breadbasket. And that's not just a nickname, it's because of its huge agricultural output. We're talking yams, sweet potatoes, corn, so much of the nation's fresh produce. They're basically feeding the country. It's a largely rural parish. Very different feel, quiet, agrarian character, a real contrast to bustling Kingston or touristy Mobay. And beyond farming, it's just steeped in rich cultural heritage. Black River, for instance, was one of Jamaica's earliest port towns. Huge role in colonial history, trade. And just looking at the map geographically, St. Elizabeth is blessed, really. Broad plains, relatively flat land, and a vital south coast shoreline. All things that make it strategically attractive for development, even if it was, well, largely overlooked for major projects until pretty recently.
Exactly. And it's against that backdrop, this traditional identity, this untapped potential, that we get Prime Minister Andrew Holness's really ambitious announcement. This was late July 2025. He declared St. Elizabeth is officially designated as the site for Jamaica's next major city. And this is a profoundly significant point. It's the first new planned city in the island's modern history. Since colonial times, really. We're not talking about just expanding an existing town. No, this is building a new urban center from the ground up. Deliberate planning, purpose-built. The Prime Minister made sure to emphasize that this new city is framed as unlike any before in modern Jamaica, a real testament to its planned nature. And the Urban Development Corporation, the UDC, that's the government's main planning and development agency, they played a key role. After doing detailed assessments, site evaluations, St. Elizabeth apparently emerged as the most viable location. Holness explained the rationale further, saying the parish uniquely combines all the requisite elements. So that means a good geographic location, significant economic potential building on farming, coastal access, and also a unique cultural fabric to define this new city.
And this isn't just like some standalone idea or a political promise floating out there. This whole plan for a new city in St. Elizabeth, it's being put forward as part of a much broader strategic agenda. The phrase they use is equitable national development. The goal seems clear: to fundamentally shift the urban growth model, move away from Kingston and Montego Bay, which are getting increasingly congested. I mean, decades of unplanned growth, right? Leads to infrastructure strain, traffic nightmares, environmental issues. We see it all the time. So the idea is build a new city from scratch on the South Coast, which is relatively underdeveloped, to create, and this is their quote, a modern, connected, and inclusive Jamaica where every parish, especially St. Elizabeth, plays a central role in national growth. It's really about decentralizing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Spreading out the economic activity, the population density. That's a huge shift for a small island nation that's historically packed development into just one or two main areas, spreading the opportunity.
And it's not just abstract policy talk either. The essential groundwork, the infrastructure, is already well underway. That makes it feel much more tangible, not just a dream. You see it most clearly with the big road projects, like the Spur Tree Bypass that was long awaited. It significantly improves that tricky, hilly highway link coming from central Jamaica into St. Elizabeth. That route was a real bottleneck for years, impacting travel, transport of goods. Now you also have segments of a new South Coast highway being built, all designed to boost connectivity, make the parish much more accessible for commerce, for residents, even for tourism. But maybe one of the most impactful developments, especially given St. Elizabeth's identity as the breadbasket, is the Pedro Plains irrigation project. That's a $23.6 billion project, massive. And they recently broke ground. It's designed to bring reliable water from the Black River to thousands of acres of farmland that currently just rely on rain. That could fundamentally change agriculture there.
Yeah, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. You can see the actual on-the-ground impact of this vision. It's not just some theory about a city somewhere down the line. They're literally building the roads. They're laying the pipes right now to support it. That Pedro Plains project, for example, it has this dual purpose, which is incredibly powerful. First, obviously, expand agricultural productivity. That's huge for Jamaica's food security, maybe cutting down on imports. But it also has this profound social impact, directly benefiting people. It includes issuing 1,000 land titles to local farmers, many of whom have worked that land for generations without formal ownership. Imagine getting that title. It gives them economic security, right? They can use the land as collateral for loans. They get a formal stake in their community's development. So it's about completely reimagining how Jamaica develops, laying the groundwork with concrete projects, and crucially, land tenure for farmers. It feels like a real commitment to the area, empowering residents, not just a distant promise.
However, this grand city dream is definitely not without its controversies, significant skepticism too. And these debates are happening very publicly in Jamaica. A major concern is about those fertile plains in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica's agricultural heartland. Could they just get swallowed up by urban sprawl if a new city is built right on them? The Jamaica Gleaner, one of the main newspapers, they published a really strong editorial. It questioned the priority, basically. Why create a shiny new metropolis on the country's most fertile A1 soil? Their argument was, this land is irreplaceable for food security. Shouldn't the government prioritize fixing up existing towns, revitalizing decaying communities across the island? And it's a compelling point, isn't it? Roughly a third of Jamaicans live in informal settlements, often with rundown infrastructure, lacking basic services. So critics ask, shouldn't the focus be on fixing those struggling communities first, before launching an expensive, potentially disruptive new city project? A project that could displace productive farms and just fundamentally change the parish's whole character. It really begs the question, doesn't it? Is this focus on a big, new build project a necessary leap forward for the nation? A bold move? Or could it be seen as, well, a costly diversion from more urgent issues like urban renewal and food security? And adding to these concerns is the issue of secrecy and the potential for land speculation. That really raises the stakes. Prime Minister Holness has insisted repeatedly that this St. Elizabeth City concept is a big deal for balanced national development. He stresses its long-term strategic importance, but he's also been very deliberate about keeping the exact proposed location secret, specifically to prevent land speculation by opportunistic investors, which just highlights the huge financial stakes, right? Land values in St. Elizabeth could just skyrocket overnight once the site is announced. And anyone with inside knowledge, insider connections, they could profit immensely. That immediately raises concerns about fairness, about equity.
Okay, so moving on from that big future vision to things people can already see, tangible symbols of progress, maybe, or at least signs of this new focus, let's talk about two very different developments, KFC and wind turbines. First up, the Maybe surprising, but definitely highly publicized opening of KFC in Black River. Summer 2025, it was KFC's first ever branch in Black River, Jamaica's 42nd KFC overall. And this wasn't a small thing. It was a significant private investment, Jay, $355 million. That's about US $2.3 million. And it created 65 new jobs right there in the town. The grand opening itself was quite a spectacle. Prime Minister Holness himself officiated. There was a marching band, a full ribbon-cutting fanfare, a very public government endorsement. Yeah, you might be thinking, a prime minister opening a KFC? Seriously, it seems almost, well, trivial at first glance. But as we dig into this, you start to see it's packed with symbolism for the government's rural development push. It showcases this tangible link, consumer-facing, between private investment and public benefit. Holness even acknowledged publicly that some Jamaicans might find his presence odd, even frivolous, especially with other national challenges. But he quickly explained, this isn't just about chicken, it's about investment, emphasizing that new businesses like this boost tax collections, money that can then fund public infrastructure. He even made that famous quip, more KFCs today could help pave roads tomorrow. A sort of cheeky economic argument, right? Meant to resonate with people frustrated by potholes and bad roads. And the timing was symbolic too. It opened in KFC Jamaica's 50th anniversary year, heralded as the first store in the next 50 years of KFC, signaling a new chapter for the brand in rural Jamaica. Holness even praised Restaurants of Jamaica ROJ, the local franchise operator, calling them a partner in our national development, lauded their community program contributions, went so far as to call KFC indeed a true Jamaican company. Plus, on a practical level, KFC sources local produce, like chicken from Jamaican farmers, that directly supports agriculture, which is super relevant for St. Elizabeth, the breadbasket. So yeah, it's definitely more than just fried chicken. It's about aligning public perception with corporate success, almost like a subtle campaign message served with every meal.
Right, but despite that positive framing, the symbolism, the sheer pomp and circumstance around a fast food opening, it definitely raised some eyebrows. And having the prime minister there, plus two key cabinet ministers, Floyd Green from Agriculture, Alban Hill from Investment, it really underscored the ruling JLP government's close alignment with specific business interests in the area. The Myers family, who own ROJ, they're influential figures in Jamaica. Mark Myers, ROJ's managing director, personally greeted Holness at the event. It highlights those ties. So inevitably, some critics cynically asked, was the government's high-profile involvement really just about public benefit? Or was it also about benefiting loyal corporate allies? Now, it's important to say there's no evidence of any illicit deal. By all accounts, it was a standard franchise expansion, just business. But the political optics, the prime minister literally serving up fried chicken to rural Jamaicans. It's intriguing. It visibly links the Holness administration's fortunes, its narrative of progress, to private investors. Kind of implies that what's good for KFC's franchisee is good for the people, good for the nation.
Okay, now shifting gears pretty dramatically from fried chicken to cleaner energy. Let's talk about those imposing windmills on the hills. Long before the KFC sign went up, St. Elizabeth saw these towering wind turbines appearing on its skyline, a very visible part of Jamaica's push into renewables. Back in 2016, BMR Energy LLC, that's an American company, they commissioned a 36.3 megawatt wind farm. It's up in Potsdam, Malvern, high in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And this was no small project, roughly US $90 million venture, a massive investment. It was described at the time as the single largest investment in St. Elizabeth since construction of the Alpart alumina plant in the late 1960s. And Alpart was monumental, so that comparison really shows the scale of the BMR investment. This wind farm was Jamaica's first privately owned utility-scale wind project, built specifically to help wean the island off costly imported oil. Jamaica used to rely on imported oil for over 90% of its energy, made the economy super vulnerable to global price swings. So its 11 turbines now supply about 3% of the nation's electricity through the grid, powering somewhere between 17,000 and 25,000 homes. Relatively low cost, too. And this directly supports Jamaica's national goal: generate 30% of electricity from renewables by 2030. That's part of the National Energy Policy Vision 2030 Jamaica Plan, aiming for energy independence, sustainability.
And the financing for these windmills, it was quite diverse, really international, showed global confidence in Jamaica's renewable potential, I think. The BMR project got substantial international funding, a US $42.7 million loan from the U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, plus US $10 million from the World Bank's IFC, another $10 million from an IFC Canada climate program, and BMR's own equity on top of that. Getting that kind of backing from reputable global agencies, it really underscores the project's viability, its strategic importance. And what's even more fascinating, maybe, is the high-profile acquisition that happened shortly after. Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Group bought BMR Energy in 2016. Branson himself came to St. Elizabeth for the wind farm's inauguration. Big event. He publicly framed the investment as part of a green energy revolution.
Yeah.
Said his motive was fighting climate change, lowering energy costs in the Caribbean. Even, quote, if it doesn't make money. Which certainly highlights this powerful alignment of business interests with environmental and social goals, at least publicly. And St. Elizabeth, with those high ridges, the open plains, it's just naturally ideal for wind and solar. Actually, the BMR farm is right next to an older JPS wind farm in neighboring Manchester. Shows the long-term potential. This project was hailed as a model public-private partnership, lauded as an example of how the public and private sector can work together, to combat climate change while providing innovative solutions. And for local communities, it brought tangible benefits too. Construction jobs, BMR claimed 90% local labor. Road upgrades needed for the heavy equipment, even renovating a local school. Direct benefits beyond just clean energy. So zooming out, the BMR wind farm isn't just about clean power. It's a visible symbol of Jamaica's commitment to energy independence, a green future. And it attracted a different kind of investor, private equity, foreign development funds, high-profile entrepreneurs like Branson, to a parish that was once largely overlooked for this sort of modern, large-scale investment.
So we've looked at the big vision for the city, these tangible symbols like KFC and the wind farm. But what are the real driving forces behind all this? And maybe crucially, why is it all happening now? This flurry of activity in St. Elizabeth, it really seems to represent this convergence, a strategic convergence of different kinds of capital. You've got public money, private money, local investment, foreign investment, each with slightly different reasons for being interested. It's like a mosaic of development. On one hand, the Jamaican government itself is directly pouring significant capital into the parish, major infrastructure, social programs. We mentioned the government-funded $23.6 billion Pedro Plains irrigation project. Huge investment aimed at unlocking farmland. Then the road improvements, Spur Tree Bypass, the planned Santa Cruz Bypass, all part of that broader South Coast connectivity upgrade. The South Coast Highway, for instance, it's financed partly by foreign loans, often built by Chinese contractors, but the government frames it as a vital national development imperative, essential for future growth. Prime Minister Holness himself explicitly linked these investments. He said, "You can now start to make sense of why we are making certain massive investments in the parish, all, he claims, to support the coming new city and the growth around it." So the government's core strategy here seems like a classic build it, the infrastructure, and they will come approach. Create the conditions to attract more private investment by making the area viable, attractive.
And that public investment is definitely attracting private players who sense opportunity. Restaurants of Jamaica, the KFC operator, they put $355 million into Black River. Why? Because they identified a profitable market there. Rural towns, historically underserved by big brands. ROJ's Mark Myers even said opening in Black River is part of a broader national development strategy to foster growth across both urban and rural communities, end quote. Though in plainer terms, KFC expands where the market analysis says there's demand, right? And the government's push improving roads, trying to raise local incomes through agriculture, jobs that will only increase consumer spending power, which undoubtedly factored into ROJ's decision. It really is a symbiotic relationship. Both sides benefit. The government needs the private sector for jobs, tax revenue, local economic stimulus, and the private sector needs the government for infrastructure, a stable business climate, a growing customer base. At that KSC opening, Holness really underscored this partnership, called ROJ part of the team. Joked about the tax revenue. It was like quip maybe, but it belies a serious point. Both sides stand to gain. And the success of things like the Black River KSC, it serves political and commercial ends for the administration.
And beyond the local private investment, foreign investors are clearly getting involved too, joining the mix. We already talked about the American and Canadian development funds backing the wind farm, and the acquisition by Virgin Group, a British conglomerate. But this leads to the really big question: who might actually bankroll the new city itself? That's a massive undertaking. So far, Prime Minister Holness hasn't revealed a specific financing plan. But usually, projects of this scale, this transformative nature, they involve public-private partnerships, PPPs, or significant foreign capital. The Jamaican state is heavily indebted. It seems unlikely they could build an entire city just from public funds. So observers are speculating. Maybe more Chinese investment. They've financed other big Jamaican projects, highways, ports, mining, or perhaps local big developers partnering with the government through the UDC. Holness's administration has been actively promoting special economic zones, new town developments using PPP models elsewhere in Jamaica, like the planned Bernard Lodge new city in St. Catherine, 17,000 homes. That provides a kind of blueprint. So what does this mean for you, the learner, especially if you follow Caribbean development? It means keeping an eye out for the specific players. We're talking Large-scale land developers, international construction firms, foreign contractors, financial consortiums, they'll play a huge role if this city goes ahead. And here's where that secrecy about the location becomes really interesting again, intensifying the speculation. Holness specifically said two areas were in close competition for the new city, refused to name them to avoid speculation, which strongly suggests investors are poised, ready to snap up land. In fact, local real estate agents are already reporting that land values in parts of St. Elizabeth have been creeping up on rumors that a government project is coming. So there's definitely pre-announcement interest bubbling away.
And as for that crucial why now factor, why all this focus in 2025? There are probably a few key reasons all aligning right now, creating a kind of perfect storm of opportunity and political will. First, election politics. That always plays a role, doesn't it? Jamaica is nearing the end of the current government's term. Elections are due by late 2025. So the ruling JLP wants to showcase big plans, big accomplishments, proof of effective governance. Holness himself explicitly talked about a next chapter of development in our new term that is fast approaching, a pretty clear nod to the electoral calendar. Announcing a huge transformative project like this, especially in a swing parish like St. Elizabeth with its mix of constituencies, well, that can really shore up political support, create a sense of momentum, excitement. Second, the economic timing seems opportune. Jamaica's fiscal situation has improved in recent years. Better debt ratios, more stability in inflation, exchange rates, thanks to some disciplined fiscal management. Holness often contrasts his government's fiscal discipline with, quote, previous governments who borrowed and left no funds to build roads. So with a bit more fiscal breathing room, the administration is eager to invest in legacy projects, things that leave a lasting mark, bolster their political narrative. And finally, there's the strategic vision element. The south coast of Jamaica really is one of the last frontiers for major development. Tourism on the north coast is mature, Kingston is crowded, struggling with overpopulation. So strategists clearly see the South and West St. Elizabeth, Westmoreland, St. Thomas as ripe for managed growth, economic diversification. St. Elizabeth is geographically strategic too, sits right between the big tourism hell of Mobane Grill to the west and the commerce education hub of Mandeville to the east. Makes it an ideal central point for a new urban center. So yeah, all these critical pieces, policy focus from Vision 2030, available capital from different sources, and significant political will, they've really converged to make St. Elizabeth a major focus point right now. It's almost a textbook example of conditions aligning for a big development push.
But with big money, big promises, especially in a developing nation context, there's always that undercurrent of skepticism and the very real question of corruption. The source document we're using, it asks directly, are officials and their cronies poised to benefit personally from St. Elizabeth's boom? And even more bluntly, are the government taking backhanders or bribes? This really echoes a common concern in Jamaica, doesn't it? The public often feels corruption shadows major development projects. Now, it's really crucial to state up front. To date, no actual evidence of kickbacks or illicit dealings in these specific St. Elizabeth initiatives has surfaced publicly. The KFC deal seems like straightforward business. The wind farm funding came from reputable international agencies with pretty strict oversight transparency rules. However, Jamaica's history does give legitimate reasons for this public caution, this watchful eye. Past development schemes like Operation Pride back in the 90s, that was a low-income housing program, it collapsed amid widespread allegations of corruption, mismanagement. Politically connected people were accused of siphoning funds, grabbing prime land for themselves. That Gleaner editorial we mentioned earlier, the one advising urban renewal over new cities, it specifically warned that any new community building effort must include guardrails to prevent corruption that undermined the previous effort. So that highlights a very real public anxiety, that shiny new projects, despite the good intentions, can become slush funds or vehicles for illicit enrichment if transparency and accountability aren't absolutely rigorous.
And in the context of St. Elizabeth's development push, there are definitely specific potential red flags observers will be watching very closely. One major area is land acquisition deals. If you're building a new city from scratch, huge amounts of land have to be bought or formally vested by the government. The worry is, who owns that land now? If politically connected investors or people with insider info quietly bought up acreage beforehand, knowing where the city might go, well, they could stand to make an enormous profit selling it to the government or partnering with them possibly at inflated prices. Now, Prime Minister Holness's secrecy about the location is meant to prevent exactly this. But as we said, rumors are flying and land values are reportedly already creeping up. So the pressure will be squarely on agencies like the UDC to conduct these land deals completely above board and at fair market value. Otherwise, accusations of sweetheart deals are almost inevitable. Another critical area, construction and procurement contracts. building a city, even just the highways, the irrigation systems. That means awarding massive government contracts, construction, engineering, materials procurement. These have historically been, well, fertile ground for kickbacks. The mechanism is often alleged to be a contractor over-invoicing, then sharing the excess funds with officials who help them get the contract or look the other way. Now, Jamaica's procurement processes have improved, new legislation, new agencies, but public confidence isn't absolute yet. Take the South Coast highway contracts, for example. They involve Chinese firms, significant foreign loans. Some critics claim these lack the same level of transparency as, say, Western-backed projects. That's a frequent critique globally with some Chinese-funded infrastructure. So any hint, any whiff that officials got inducements to award these multi-billion-dollar contracts, that could explode into a major national scandal. And it's probably worth noting, too, the Prime Minister himself has faced unrelated scrutiny recently, like that 2023 Integrity Commission report looking into unexplained wealth among some parliamentarians. So he's undoubtedly keen to avoid any perception of impropriety around these very high-profile St. Elizabeth projects. And the concerns can even trickle down to local governance, more micro-level bribery. If St. Elizabeth really is headed for an economic boom, then every zoning change, every environmental permit, every license needed for a new business suddenly becomes valuable. And there's a risk that individuals might try to grease local palms to speed things up or gain unfair advantages. Small-scale graft can corrode the whole process. Which raises a crucial point, I think. From a broader perspective, corruption isn't just financial crime, is it? It fundamentally undermines public trust. It distorts markets. And critically, it diverts resources, money, land, opportunities away from the people who need development the most. So, it becomes a critical social justice issue. It impacts everyone, especially the most vulnerable. There's going to be a strong need for really robust oversight. Independent bodies like the Contractor General's Office, now part of new anti-corruption agencies, they'll need to monitor this projected flurry of activity very carefully, ensure accountability at all levels.
Right. And for his part, Prime Minister Holness has publicly, consistently denied any wrongdoing. He often pushes back against what he calls the weaponization of accusation of corruption in politics, says it's used for political point scoring. He emphasizes that his government's projects like the new social housing program or the land titling in Pedro Plains are done, quote, without any hint of misallocation or misappropriation. He stresses transparency, direct benefits to citizens. In St. Elizabeth's case, you can expect the government to continually point to the tangible outputs. Look, roads built, thousands of jobs created, critical land titles issued to farmers. See, proof that development is above board, benefiting ordinary people. They also stress the importance of community involvement, consultation. Holness has promised residents, local leaders will have significant input in shaping the new city, the tourism initiatives. And this inclusive approach, if it's genuinely followed, rigorously implemented, it can act as a vital check against top-down profiteering. Because local stakeholders feel empowered to raise concerns if something seems off, it fosters a kind of bottom-up accountability.
But beyond the official line of equitable development, tangible benefits, there's another concern that often bubbles up in public discussion: the potential for political calculation behind it all. Some people suspect these huge projects could be strategically aimed at shoring up votes, consolidating support in St. Elizabeth. Remember, it has a mix of constituencies, can swing between parties. For instance, MP Floyd Green, a prominent government figure, attending the KFC opening. He likely welcomed the positive attention, the perceived economic boost in his constituency. That plays well locally. Government largesse, new jobs, better roads, and especially those land titles for farmers that can translate directly, powerfully, into electoral goodwill. Increased voter support. And there's also widespread talk, you hear it, that the ruling party wants to create a truly indelible legacy, a new city, a modern planned community, something no previous administration has successfully pulled off in Jamaica. That kind of achievement would undoubtedly cement Prime Minister Holness's name right there in Jamaica's history books, a transformative leader.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. It's kind of an open secret, isn't it? Politicians love big ribbon cuttings. The Prime Minister himself even joked about it, said something like, I don't know why people are so upset with me cutting ribbons. That is what the government is supposed to do. It means something is happening. But this kind of ribbon-cutting governance, while it makes for good photos, good headlines, it can feel superficial if it's not truly backed by long-term equitable benefits for the actual people on the ground. So a crucial question for observers, especially from a social justice angle, is, are these developments genuinely improving life for the most vulnerable in St. Elizabeth? The small farmer dealing with climate change, the unemployed youth needing real opportunities, the family in an underserved area lacking basic amenities. Or are they geared more towards the big investors, the foreign tourists, those already better off, potentially creating new kinds of inequality? And lastly, there's that critical issue of sustainability, social impact. On a parish known for its natural beauty, its quiet life, St. Elizabeth's charm, a lot of it, lies in that quiet rural character, the unspoiled landscapes. Transforming it into an urban hub, a tourism magnet that could disrupt existing communities, could lead to displacement, could put huge pressure on delicate ecosystems. The Black River wetlands, for example, environmentally sensitive, critical habitats. A tourism boom, more urbanization that needs extremely careful management. Strict environmental protections to avoid irreversible damage. Now, Holness has encouraged Black River residents to preserve the town's historic buildings, noted they'll become exceptional in value as development happens, which sounds positive, right? An approach to heritage. But it also kind of hints that outside investors might swoop in, commercialize these historic sites if locals aren't properly empowered, resourced to lead the preservation and benefit from it themselves. And the mention of developing education tourism, maybe international campuses, training centers, intriguing, could be beneficial. But you have to wonder, is the main purpose local uplift? Or is it primarily to attract foreign money, foreign students, with maybe fewer direct benefits flowing to the surrounding community? Ultimately, transparency in the planning, in the implementation, that's going to be absolutely key. To ensure the agenda stays focused on genuine, broad-based community development, not just economic exploitation of a new frontier. So, to try and sum all this up, St. Elizabeth is experiencing something really quite rare, quite profound for Jamaica. It's this convergence of strong political will and significant capital investment, all focused on a parish that was, for a long time, considered off the main development path. The optimistic view, the one the government and proponents push, is that this could energize the local economy, create thousands of badly needed jobs, modernize farming with projects like Pedro Plains, and crucially, give Jamaica that much-needed third urban pillar, take pressure off Kingston and Montego Bay. Black River's new KFC. More than just a meal stop, it's a tangible sign of commercial growth to come, a powerful PR symbol for the PM's rural development push. Likewise, those silent, efficient wind turbines spinning up on the horizon. They signal a commitment to future-focused industry, sustainable power for the whole nation. St. Elizabeth, once known mostly for yams, for world-famous rum, might soon be known for planned communities, cutting-edge solar farms, heritage tourism, a real identity transformation. So, what does this mean for you, the learner? Especially if you're interested in how developing nations tackle rapid modernization. It means St. Elizabeth isn't just a dot on the map anymore, it's a living, breathing case study. Modern development in a small island nation poised right on the brink of truly significant change.
Yes, but as with any change this dramatic, particularly in Jamaica's context, there's that persistent undercurrent of skepticism, and it's both understandable and, frankly, healthy. Jamaicans have heard grand promises before, haven't they? Experience teaches them to ask that critical question, okay, but who really benefits? The government's stated agenda to improve the quality of life of the people so they can live and work where they are, it sounds noble. And if it's executed equitably, it should uplift ordinary St. Elizabeth residents. And there are positive signs supporting that narrative. Those farmerland titles are huge. Genuine job creation from new businesses. Investment in local schools via corporate support. Those are tangible benefits. However, ensuring that local people, not just the political elites or the outside investors, truly reap the long-term rewards, that's going to require significant sustained vigilance. Calls for transparency, for accountability, they're only going to get louder as billions of dollars start flowing into the parish. Looking at the bigger picture, it's absolutely crucial for civil society, for the media, for independent oversight bodies to keep a very close eye on the land deals, the contract awards, the actual implementation of these projects. Even the Prime Minister's strongest supporters would probably agree. Public trust has to be earned continuously, especially when rumors of backhanders can so easily sprout and take root in the shadows of these multi-billion-dollar plans. In the end, St. Elizabeth's story really holds both things simultaneously, profound hope and significant hazard. There's the hope that long-needed development finally reaches this proud but historically underserved parish, bringing prosperity, opportunity. But there's also the hazard that the rush of interest, the influx of capital could lead to exploitation or corruption if it's not carefully checked, managed transparently. Which leads us to consider this final question. In the coming years, will this grand experiment in St. Elizabeth truly be, as the Prime Minister put it, something unique that transforms the nation for the better, creating an inclusive, sustainable model? Or will it become another cautionary tale, joining past examples of development gone awry, leaving behind unfulfilled promises, and perhaps even deeper inequalities?
Something profound to definitely chew on as you follow the headlines coming out of Jamaica. We've done our deep dive into the situation as it stands now. It's really up to you and all observers to keep watching how this unfolds. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into St. Elizabeth.